I'm in a.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the host for today's episode. Today, I want to talk about choosing standards for your medical devices. When designing and developing a medical device, it's important to know what standards to use. Usually, or you should know the regulations, but it's not always clear what standards to follow. To make sure your team isn't reinventing the wheel, but to make sure that you're meeting all of the requirements that the different regulatory bodies are going to require upon submission. So today with us to talk about this is a special guest, Leo Eisner. He's the founder and principal compliance consultant of Eisner Safety Consultants. He's known as the IEC 60601 guy, named so by the founder of Greenlight Guru, John Spear, no less. Leo provides top-tier product safety and compliance and regulatory support to the medical device industry. He has a sharp eye for detail and quality, and he ensures his clients' compliance needs are met. Leo's expertise spans the IEC 60601 series, ISO 15223, and ISO 2417. He's helped hundreds of SMEs and Fortune 500 companies achieve compliance. He's also reviewed and generated many product safety and labeling sections for EU technical files. And as a member of the IEC 60601-1 development teams, Leo has shaped both the third and fourth editions of this standard. And I'll add one last thing. Leo was recently awarded the IE6 1906 Award, which is a prestigious award given to those who've contributed heavily to the development of prominent IEC standards. I'm sure I'm messing that up a little bit, but feel free to correct me, Leo. How are you doing today?
Oh, great. Thanks for asking, Etienne. You pretty much nailed it. Do you want me to read the nomination wording or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, it makes me feel good for all the effort I've put into the standards development over these many years at this point. I'm dating myself a little bit. And also of the team that worked on the 80601-258 standard, which I'm the convener of, which is, it's a little wordy, lens removal and vitrectomy equipment. So it's eye surgery
Okay.
of sorts. CAD and VIT is the abbreviation. So it reads, his leadership as convener of IEC SC62D Joint Working Group 9, resulting in the publication of the standard I just mentioned, 2024, so very recent, which reflects the state of the art. Mr. Eisner sounds very European to me. I don't know who nominated me yet, is truly dedicated and committed to his role. His overall knowledge in the field of medical standardization in SE62D and other related committees is well known by this community. Makes me feel pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it should. I mean, you have put a lot of years in and a lot of effort, and I appreciate that. When you really think about what really is the outcome of all of this work is safer medical devices on the market. That's really important. So I appreciate all the effort you're putting into that, because some companies who are out there may look at all this mountains of standards that they're going to have to go through as pure obstacles, but in reality, what it's doing is making sure that you have a device that is going to work in every scenario that it should. So before I just go down that rabbit hole too far, let's explore the medical device compliance as it relates to standards and guidances. And maybe to begin with, because we talked a little bit about your experience, how did you even get involved with medical device standards?
Well, it's a little long and woolly story, but out of college, I got a couple offers, and one of them was Underwriters Labs. So that's a test lab. And I didn't do medical products, but I did everything under the sun but. And I got sort of disillusioned with UL after 9 years or three attempts to leave UL. Only took three attempts. Uh, yeah, exactly. And I went to Austin looking for a job, Texas, of all
Okay.
places, from Santa Clara, California to Austin. A little different. Um, and I couldn't find a job, but I met a headhunter. And the headhunter the next day calls me and said, I've never met a safety engineer before, but I have a potential situation for you. Would you like to live in San Diego? And go, sounds pretty interesting to me. I'm game. So I talked to the person on the phone for an hour and a half, 2 hours from my friend's house. And they said, can you come down next week for an interview? I said, sure, why not? Talked to my boss. He said, yeah, no problem. Go on. disappeared, all day interview, and is asked at the end of the day, do you have an idea when you'll have a decision? We already made up our mind. You got
Wow.
the job. When do you want to start? It's like, I'm there. Give me 2 weeks. I'll make notice. So I started at
Fantastic.
TV Food,
Yeah.
pretty well recognized name in the industry. So I learned MDD, uh, and auditing and 601 when it was second edition. It wasn't third edition yet. UL 544 because it was still a lot of national stuff. There was homologation in France, and every country did its own thing. It wasn't all organized yet because MDD was just starting to come into play.
Wow. Okay.
And I've
So,
stayed with medical ever since. And starting with 601, I started reading standards obviously more and more at that point. And when I went to Carl Startz Imaging a couple years later, and I started seeing the development of 601 and dash 2-18, which I was involved in because of endoscopic cameras. I had to track the development. So that's when I got into knowing about the development of standards. And then sometime into my consulting career, I started into it when I got offered by several companies came to me and said, we got a standard we need to get into Japan for regulatory purposes, primarily. We want you to lead the charge. I said, okay, I'll learn how to do it. I connected with the vice chair of 62D at that time, and he was more than happy to help mentor me through the process.
wow. That's really interesting because I meet some people who have helped or been involved in the creation of and publication of standards, but to a lot of us, it feels like a little bit of a black box, maybe a mysterious process through which these things arrive in our inbox or whatever requirements and standards. So we could go down that path at some point. Maybe it would make sense though to go ahead and get into the meat of the topic, which maybe the next question I would have is why do we need all of these standards? You mentioned the different countries that have different ideas, so I'm guessing that kind of is part of the answer. But why are standards so crucial in medical device development?
Well, we had a post conversation today actually on LinkedIn about design inputs. So they're a great source of design inputs, as you and I would not disagree on that point, even though
No, no,
we had a slight disagreement on semantics, as you and I said earlier today,
right.
about the wording design inputs and how it's interpreted a little bit. But standards are a good source of design inputs, and that's one of the first things we deal with my consultancy with a lot of our clients is we look at applicable standards, laws, guidances, and regulations as inputs into your design process. And then also, obviously, for supporting regulatory submissions, looking for evidence of consensus to the requirements as standards are the easiest path forward. So look at FDA for recognized consensus standards. They say it's voluntary, but if you don't use that voluntary standard or guidance, you're going to get a lot of pushback from the regulator,
Yeah.
FDA, or the notified body, or TGA, or whatever regulator it may be, even if they say it's voluntary. Some regulators may say some standards or guidances are mandatory. And in some cases, even FDA has some documents that are mandatory.
So maybe we could walk through the process a little bit on how to do that. How my medical device that I am developing, how I know that it needs this or that standard, this consensus standard, that consensus standard, or maybe with my specific medical device, maybe I like to use the example of a insulin pump. I know there are insulin pumps that have come before me, and there are going to be pumps that come after me, but I feel like mine's special and it doesn't have to follow this particular standard for whatever reason, or maybe it does. How do I determine what's required for my particular product?
So break down into steps, obviously. first thing is understand your product. So this is what we ask all our clients is we want to understand your product. What does it do or does? I was going to say that doesn't sound right. Uh, what is the intended use and the indications for use? And also, what are the markets? Because if we don't understand the markets, we don't know how the design is going to be impacted because each country has different sets of standards or deviations to a standard. So, like in the IEC, you might have electrical changes to national versions of the standard potentially. So knowing that up front can impact the design. So it's important to know that. Also, you're going to want to read once you know the standards that you think apply, you want to make sure you read the scope because knowing the scope of the standard will tell you are you in scope or out of scope. Some standards that you might be out of scope, you still may apply partially even if it doesn't fully apply. I've been dealing with a couple clients where they're not in scope for surgical robotic standard, the 80601 2-77, but part of it applies still because FDA is concerned about the motion and the safety that the patient's not going to get pinched or um, the device isn't going to surgically hurt them, even though it's not a surgical device, that the motion or speed of the device isn't going to hurt them during the procedure, even if it's not a per se surgical device. So that's the first step. The next thing, which we talked about at the markets a little more, is looking at obtaining the proper standards for those countries. Um, So there's the international standards. So you could look at Canada, US. You have, so for international standards, you have like IEC, ISO, ASTM is actually an international organization now. It used to not be, but quite quite a few years ago now at this point, it became international. ETSI, which I never remembered the abbreviation, so I actually have to look it up, but I believe it's European Telecommunication Standards Institute. And it's one of the three European standards organizations. There's CEN and CENELEC. CEN is the non-electrical standards, which is equivalent to IEC. Wait, no, CEN is equivalent to the ISO, excuse me, and CENELEC is equivalent to the IEC. So the European is CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI. And then for the IEC level, which is the international, it's IEC is equivalent to CENELEC and ISO is equivalent to CEN.
Okay.
So the international level would be IEC, ISO, ASTM, and ETSI. When you get to sort of national or regional, then you'd get to CEN and CENELEC. They're not international per se because they're more regional block. It's sort of a little odd. They're sort of a creature on their own, but ETSI is international.
Okay.
It's sort
So it's
of
almost like
that
if I were to
that's
use
a crossbreed.
if I were to use almost a different example, like building a house in the U.S., there are certain things you have to, maybe federal requirements. I don't know if there's actually federal requirements about building, but then you get into the building codes in each county, and I don't know how it goes for Europe, but I know each individual county would have their own specific requirements or township. So it's almost something to those levels, I suppose. So knowing where you're going to be marking the device makes sense to me.
Yeah. So going down below the international, you have the National Standards Organization. So AMI for the US is one.
Okay.
They're not the only one. And then for the EN, like I said, CEN and CENELEC. Canada, which is CAN CSA
Okay.
or CAN/CSA. Then you can look at your own manufacturer spec. Is not a standard, but it's still a requirement. So you have your specifications you can look at. And then what I use a lot is regulatory databases, which I have a preference because I've been working with this group for quite a few years, is MedBoard. I like a lot, but I have a direct association. So I'm going to disclose that because I'm very transparent with my clients and everyone I work with. I
Yeah.
don't like hiding anything. It's just not my style. But there's also other really good groups out there. There's RIMSYS, I think is how you would say it. There's a Mergo, there's a RASI group, and that's just to name a few. There's a slew of other regulatory databases out there, but you need to decide what works for your organization, what functionalities fit your firm for the current and also future needs, and also your cost. What's reasonable for where you're at and where you're headed, right? Because you're going to grow over time. What do you need?
Yeah. And it kind of begs the question. So if I were starting down the path of creating my insulin pump, because in this case, I'm gonna go look and see who I'm targeting, what the indications for use are, the intended use, all of the different regions I'd like to market. Maybe eventually. I guess you would start with I like to think expansively first and get all of the data, and then you start paring down process of elimination, get a little bit more restrictive or constrictive. But what are the steps once you've identified this massive stack of ISO standards, or EN standards, or the international and the national level? I think that's interesting that you broke that down into all the different levels where you might be targeting. That's a good categorical way of looking at all the standards that may apply. What are the steps of incorporating that into your design? Because that seems like a huge undertaking.
So then you go into the actual standard and the guidances. Well, so then you look at the product and you go, okay, what are the features and functions you have of that device, and go against the standard and go, what are the requirements that fit that? Okay, this requirement now applies. This item doesn't apply. This item does apply, and pull them out. Now, the standards as they're written now are not very atomic, so it's hard to do that. So
Yeah,
some paragraphs are written that they go on and on and on and on. And other requirements are written very atomic. So it depends on the standard or the guidance, how they're written. Some FDA guidances go on for pages for one item, and it's really hard to pull apart.
yeah,
Same for some of the standards. 601's just as bad in many cases. I won't say it isn't. Fourth edition that we're developing now, that's one of the requirements, is that we are writing atomic requirements. That is one of the design specifications, to
very
make
cool.
it more atomic and to make it so it can turn into a design, um, into basically a specification once you classify based on all the different classifications we're going to set up. To make it, you pick your classifications based on your device, and it should pretty much fall out that you can almost get your requirements out of it. That's the end goal. I don't know how close we're going to get to it or not. We're 5+ years out from there, maybe 10.
Do you see other standard committees kind of applying that same rule, or the goal to be somewhat atomic?
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah,
think that's more forward facing.
very cool. One of the things then I guess that comes to mind is prioritization, because when you have this, and I don't know a good number on how many standards. I've worked in product development at different times, and couldn't even tell you the number of standards we were using or applying. But how do you prioritize the ones in your sign?
Well, it's hard when there's so many standards that apply. And I could see that's sort of where your question's headed
Right.
down the path, I suspect. And I know we come up with a lot of standards and guidances for our clients, and their eyes sort of glaze over usually, especially the newer ones to the industry. Um, so I really had to think about this a little bit. And I'd say the standards that impact your quality system, your design, your testing, and your product. So look at risk to the overall design and the timeline. Uh, but realize that these are all design inputs that should be addressed as early on in the project as possible. If not, what happens? You bring in design risk later in the project. So it's a balance, and it's a business decision that you have to make. That what's the risk that you're bringing into the project?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose if you look at it from, I don't know, project management view, you say, okay, this standard is going to require a feature XYZ that maybe we weren't planning for. So we're going to eliminate some of these options, maybe even refining your indications for use. I see an expansive indication for use likely increasing the timeline and design risk and so on, or is that something you see, or how do you see companies handling that overwhelming stack of standards that they would have to meet uh, and balancing the project itself? Do you see any of that?
So we're working on a project right now where we I don't want to expose too much,
Right.
obviously. So we see in the design concept that they're trying to do a little too much. And so we've been guiding them to sort of box in the indications a little bit more and keep it a little more contained so the requirements aren't as onerous on them. And it's going to be design requirements. It's going to be to meet EMC requirements. It's going to be to meet um, physical grounding requirements and how, if we even have an applied part marking or not, which we're still deciding how to approach that because there's no physical applied part on this product.
Mhm.
It has energy that comes back and forth at you. And under the definition of medical electrical equipment, you don't have to have an applied part, which a lot of people don't understand in 601. It's not written that it's so clear as mud.
And what do you mean by the applied part?
So the applied part is something that touches the patient that is intended to touch the patient to and I'd have to look at the definition because I'm really bad at definitions.
I know they're so specific.
They are, and you have, and I try not to memorize the definitions. So I'm going to actually go there because I am just so part of the equipment that in normal use necessarily comes in physical contact with the patient for the equipment to perform its function.
Hmm. Okay.
It says a few more words than that, but that's the gist.
Okay. Okay. And so you
And,
have this
and we're
situation.
talking for electrical equipment specifically.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So as a result, it sounds like maybe some of the indications for use would be pared down in a situation where, well, if we don't, we're going to have this seemingly irrelevant standard applied to our product, which will increase design requirements. It's going to increase testing. It's potentially going to increase timeline and so forth. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say the intended use or indications for use is where it's changing. It's more the design itself,
Okay.
how it's approached, I think is where we're working on it in this case. Another case is how, and this does affect um, the intended use, I believe is right. I always get intended use indications for use a little mixed up. It's not my
No, I
bailiwick
know.
exactly. That so devices that are not used in clinical setting ends up being what's called home use. Home use is anything outside the clinical setting, outside a hospital, a doctor's office, uh, surgery center, whatever you want to call it. All those type of indications are like a clinical setting. But the home, the sports center, the pool, the school, your car, that's all home use.
As Pumbaa from
That's,
The Lion King said, "Home is where the rump rests." So, so I guess
yes,
whoever
that
wrote
is
that, that's
true.
so go on.
But that's not clear when you see home use, you think
Right.
of the home, right?
Yeah.
But, and the wording in the standard, you have to really read it over and over again to understand it's not just the home.
Yeah. Good point. So, uh, and I know there's a lot of guidance out there now, or coming anyway, about home use. The FDA seems to be increasing some of
Oh,
their.
that's been out since like 2014. Mary Brady wrote that guidance document many, many years ago. I
Yeah.
commented on that document with her many years ago.
I guess I'm talking
My
about.
fingers have been in a lot of things.
Have you seen the simulated home that the FDA is working on? That's the one that I was thinking about. I don't know what
Oh, I've seen something about it, but I haven't really
that I'm curious about
known
what that's going to
much
be
about
like,
it.
but it doesn't matter. But anyway, you mentioned guidance documents in addition to standards. So I know there's you mentioned the different levels of standards. We talked about regulations, we talked about standards, and then there are the guidance documents as well. How do you advise companies handling that level? I know some people want to treat them as optional, but they're not really.
No,
But
they're
what
not.
which ones to apply and which ones not?
So again, you need to know what your device does, what's the intended use, indications for use. That's all really important because that guides you to know what to look for. So the FDA guidance database is great because you have that search feature. So you can search for like wireless, EMC, home use, biocompatibility, and you can find the documents very easily. So it's a great database. And most, um, I mean, you can find MDCG guidance documents for Europe as well. And there's a lot of other regulatory guidance databases. I know Saudi Arabia, you can get their guidance databases
Oh,
pretty
really?
easily too. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. And TGA and most of the other countries, if you know where to search, and that's not always easy without a regulatory database. I have that easy access because I use that a lot more. But there, you can go to each country and look, but a lot of times they're not translated. So
Yeah.
then you need to translate. But go and search them out for each country. You need to know what countries. Again, you need to know your markets, right?
So that would
Because every country, their guidances aren't going to be the same. Also, use IMDRF, uh, which is what replaced GHTF.
GSA. Yeah. GHTF.
Yes,
Yeah.
I said that. I said that right. Work group, and I can't remember the exact abbreviation for that. And I think there's another group that's joining together with Asian work group, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
You mentioned something about the translation. That one's I want to go back to that just briefly. I can imagine if you just randomly use something like Google Translate to translate a guidance document or a regulation, there are potential errors in translation or the whole lost in translation issue. Do you see, how do you recommend people translate these things, or does it matter that much?
That's a good question. I haven't uh, approached that question yet, so I don't
Okay.
know the great answer. I mean, if you're using it as something that's an official document within your company, which you should be doing, you probably need to vet that translation. And as an auditor, I would question that translation if they don't have an English source for that document to use the translation process that they have within the company, which should be a SOP within the process within the company. They should have a standard operating procedure ready for translation,
Yeah. I guess in the
which
in the
they
converse in the conversation of standards, I mean, it's inevitable that we talk about the standardization of your translation ability. So, yeah. what are some examples of the impact of failing to adhere to standards? Do you have any examples of someone who maybe they didn't follow the standard?
Well, got lots of good ones. They're not so nice. So I'll just go down a mental list. Delays in safety and EMC testing. So that's not terrible, but it's going to slow you down getting to market. Not receiving safety certifications or passing the EMC requirements. You don't have a certification with EMC testing typically, rarely.
If
You
you
could
don't
have a
follow the standard.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you go through EMC testing, you don't get a certification in most cases. Safety, you can get a safe certification mark or a label, whatever you want to call it. You could have a recall. That's getting pretty bad. You could have a lawsuit. That's even worse, right? Delays in regulatory product approvals, not receiving product approvals by national regulators. That's sort of similar, but not receiving it now. Company failing to get funding, or you could not go to market or folding your doors. And I've seen pretty much every single one of these. I've
Wow.
had a client that came to me after they worked with another consultant, and the consultant just gave them really bad advice. And they got I can't even remember, I think it was an 18 or 20-page list from a notified body that said, here are all the issues. So I worked with them for like 6 months or so to get through all these issues. And then, I don't know, 6 months or a year later, they folded because they were just too late to market by then. That
Wow.
delay just really hit them hard
Yeah. And so though had they followed the standards required, they might not have ever had
up
those
front.
issues. Yeah,
If
up
they
front.
did the work up front, they would have been better off. Or if they spent the time earlier doing what they needed to, I think they would have been in better shape.
Well, why do you think
And
people
that,
don't? Do you think it's ignorance, or do you think are there other challenges that are going to come up when they're trying to implement standards, or what's the
so I've seen with some startups, they just don't have, they don't feel they have the money to invest up front sometimes, that they'd rather do certain things in a different approach, or they don't think investing the time and money up front for that review up front is worth it. They'd rather focus their money elsewhere, or they're ignorant of not understanding the process well enough that they realize they need to do it that early on. Because a lot of my clients are too far in the process when they come to us.
yeah.
We always really push to do this review like at the very beginning of design inputs, not so far down the line that you're almost at the line of switching to really being at the design input phase,
Yeah, because
design
standards,
output phase. I don't
right,
think I said that quite right.
right. It makes sense that this is something that you would want mixed into the development of your device, not just a bolt on later. You don't just bolt on electrical safety
No,
after the medical device has been done.
not just electrical safety, but any of the standards
Right.
or guidances or regulations and
Yeah.
laws.
In fact, human
And it
factors might be
takes
one.
strategy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Human factors might even be one of the more expensive ones when you consider the injected molded parts that are interfacing with the patient themselves. The cutting of that steel is not cheap. Um, if you decide you need a concave button versus a convex button or whatever the case may be.
Well, cutting the mold applies to, so electrical safety is a misnomer for 601 because 601 covers electrical safety, mechanical hazards. There's a lot of additional stuff that's outside of just of electrical. It's not just an electrical standard, Toto. Dare I say it that way? There's a lot more to 601 than just electrical.
Okay. Well, we'll have to get into 60601 at some point because I think that's, I mean, being the 60601 guy, we need to have a conversation about that more deeply. But um,
That'd be fun.
any, how do people overcome or how do maybe what we've talked about some of the issues if you don't implement these standards, but how do the best companies implement these standards?
Okay. How do they implement? They research the standards up front. They do their work. They do their research. So, um,
Just knuckle
which
down
would
and do it.
be,
That's the case. Yeah.
yeah, they knuckle down into it. That's right. So they have the resources in house to do it typically, or if they need to, they hire the resources. But hopefully they have the resources in house. Because if you don't, you're not going to learn in the long run, right? So
If
it's
they,
always better. It's
yeah,
always better to have in-house resources. But if you're a small firm, sometimes you don't have the bandwidth to do that. So you might have to rely on some external resources.
if it is a smaller company with limited resources, any recommendations on how to go about doing this?
Um, yes, so for standards to start off with, Estonia is always the best resource. And any
The
good
country.
consultant will tell you that Estonia standards is not the country itself, but the standards organization.
Okay.
Um, yes.
Okay, Estonia standards. Okay.
Yeah. So you can go to their website and you just want to make sure you get the Estonia standards equivalent of the IEC or the ISO standard. And you get two copies of it, not one, because if it's one copy, it's sort of a locked up version and you don't have the flexibility, but it's still hugely cheaper than if you go to the IEC website, if you go to BSI, or you go to other standards organizations out there. Everyone's figured out this is the cheapest route in general, unless you buy a big database worth of stuff. So I personally get the Amy database every year because I use a lot of those standards over and over again. And as they add to that database, I get access to the standards that are added to that database. So that's one resource I spend somewhere as a member. I think I'm paying now about, and don't quote me on this number, about $1,500 a year. And
Okay.
that's a bargain because some standards run $1,000 right now. Because I was talking to a mentor of mine on IEC, actually. He is my primary mentor for IEC standards development. This morning, we had an hour and a half conversation. And he looked at a standard that the consolidated edition of the alarm standard, and it was like 1,000 Swiss francs,
Wow.
which is like he went, holy crap. He was like shocked. It was so expensive on the IEC website. The IEC website, I tell everyone, don't buy from there. Really expensive source.
Hopefully that doesn't get back to the IEC, but I don't know if they listen to this
I'm
podcast.
sure it will,
It's
and
okay.
they won't be offended. I
Sure.
don't think.
No, no, no.
Hopefully,
Okay. So
they
Estonia standards, the Amy database.
database. Let me think about that. Oh, and if you can be on a standards committee, that's a good way to also get access because you can get drafts of the standards that you're working on, but also whatever committee you're on. So, like, I'm on way too many committees at this point because I'm on TC 62, 62A, 62D, which I get a ton of drafts because of all that. And then also TC 210 on the ISO side.
Yeah. I
So
think that's
between all that, I get a lot.
That's good advice. And if you have a company, if your company has someone who could potentially be on that, it's good for your that person's career and the additional foresight into the future. I know we had a VP of quality who was on the 11607-1 committee. So What is 11607? I feel like it's sterilization. I just remember the number.
It's some type of sterilization or cleaning, it sounds like.
Packaging for terminally sterilized product. So that was
Yes,
good.
sterilization, yeah.
Um, but
Yes, so
anyway,
it's a good learning. You need to be somewhat involved. You can't just sit in the background. If you do, some committees will knock you off over time.
yeah.
Some national committees will, some won't. I've seen dead people on the rolls for IEC. You can't get them off sometimes. I've complained to my leadership about my standard committee that I'm a convener of. There's people that have been on this list now for 10 years that haven't been active, and I can't get them off the list.
Okay, so maybe maybe I shouldn't ask
That's
this
just
question because you're not going to want to have to get them off later, but how could someone get on a committee if they wanted to be on a committee?
so each country has their own rules. So I only can talk to the US.
Sure.
So, and I know the IEC side, I don't really know the ISO side very well, be honest, even though I am on a couple ISO committees. So with IEC for the Amy, I'll say for the medical standards, let's talk that way instead of just IEC. You would go contact Amy, and they have a whole bunch of national, so there's national committees and then there's the international level. So for the national, you contact the national committee chair, whoever that is. For the US, it's Amy. And you can ask them what are the roles to get on the committee. For that, you need to be a corporate member of Amy in this case. And then they ask that you are an expert within whatever committee you want to be within that. So, like surgical robotics, you have to have basically, I would say, someone that knows the IEC standards in the 601 series and has had some experience in surgical robotics in some way.
Okay.
And if you have some industry experience or test lab experience or 601 experience in that, and pass your CV, and then it gets passed to the committee for a month to review, I think roughly. And if you pass muster by the committee and no one objects, or you have no major objection, you would get added on to the committee. Now, for some committees, they limit how many people are allowed on based on that. Either there's too much country representation, especially on the international level, or there's too many members already on the committee. So it depends. It could be committee based, or it could be national based, or it could be international based. So every committee is a little different. Every national committee is a little different how they structure things.
Okay. The listeners are probably going to be upset with me for getting off track on that, but I was curious, so I had to ask.
No, not
How
at all. I'm sure they were interested.
if
I
we
hope.
go, yeah, I would hope so. I would hope so. I always hope they're interested in the same things I'm interested in because and if you're not, those of you listening, please let me know what you'd like me to ask. I'd love to hear any comments or any feedback. What about, okay, so we have someone that we hopefully is staying informed on these standards and regulations, but uh, regulations and guidance documents are coming out all the time, and it's hard to rely on just the. I mean, I recommend that people subscribe to the FDA's site, but aside from that, there's got to be other ways to do it. What do you recommend?
So there are quite a few other ways to do it. The few that come to mind right offhand is there's watch lists for basically every standards distributor out there. And they've changed names a lot lately. So I actually did a little digging before we started this podcast. I did it a couple weeks ago. So what was Tech Street, which is what I've been used to for years, and I had some informal arrangement with them years and years ago, is now called Accurus, ACCURIS. So if you look that up, you should be able to find them. or probably even if you looked up Tech Street, you'd probably find it. And another one, it used to be ILI Infodisk, now is Intertech Inform. Intertech bought them, which
Okay.
is really interesting. And that's fairly recently. So if you want to track like 14,001 or 9,001 or 1345 or 60601 2 77 or 2 78, you can type that in to watch list. And as it changes, they'll give you an update email. You can do that with the Canadian standards too. You can do that with UL, I believe, as well. I believe I haven't done, yeah, actually, I get a weekly list from UL. So
Yeah.
you can do that with UL. So there's a lot of sources out there. You can do that with the national and with the SDOs and with the distributors too. I believe BSI, you can do that as well. Um, and they also have their, what is it? Compliance Navigator, which is a paid service. That's a
Okay.
very paid service. Then there's, like I said, the national standards development organizations, sort of like ANSI, or from the IEC website. There's a link that I could send you in the for the show notes,
Yeah.
or from IEC 62A or 62D. You can track or go on the website and look at the website and see what's going on within each committee on a weekly basis. Because, like, on I think it's every Friday night for IEC, they post what's been updated every week.
Okay.
For the development of the standards, what drafts are being published, and also what's been published, I
Yeah.
believe. Then there's also for ISO, there's this really awesome tool called the online browsing platform, which is a really powerful tool because you can search standards. I don't know exactly what collections are. I'd have to look. Publications, graphical symbols, which is a really awesome tool. I love that one. And terms and definitions and country codes even,
Okay. And that's on
which
ISO's
are
website or
ISO webs. Yeah, on the ISO
okay.
website, if you go iso.org and then right on the top, there's three little sort of white little icons and it says OBP,
Okay. Yeah.
online browsing platform.
Got it.
And I use the graphical symbols one all the time, trying to figure out symbols. And these are symbols like ISO 7000, which everyone uses, and the 15223, which are
Yeah.
specific to medical, and the ones that are referenced in ISO 20417, which is a big industry document now that came out in 2021 out of TC 210 as well. 15223 also came out of TC 210.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. And I'm sure there are people out there who are listening who are walking their dog or out for a run or at the gym. So we will put these links in the show notes. So don't worry about running the gym out of the gym. You need to get your workout in. So very
Yes.
cool. Yeah,
Don't come home just for this.
we'll get all those links and so that it's easy to find all of those things in the reference section of the show notes. Um, that's very cool. I know we're coming up close on time. What advice would you give? Do you have any other advice that you give to the professionals who are considering this or regarding the use of standards since they are going to be interacting with them?
Sure, always have advice if you can't tell. Just like you always have advice too.
I always have opinions.
Okay, if you say so. Know your product and intended use indications for use, as I've said a few times. Environments, as we sort of discussed a little bit with home use, is a good example. What environments are they being used in? What markets are they being sold in? So I'm beating that home a little bit. Do your research early. As we discussed, you hit problems if you don't do it early. Understand, excuse me, understand the scopes of the standards or the documents you are researching, which could be guidance, regulations, laws, directives. It's not just standards. Some people call standards other documents too. So things get interchanged depending where and who you're talking to. Break down the requirements and the standards into requirements, sort of like we were talking about. What are you doing with these standards for your requirements that apply to your product as inputs? Are they user needs? Are they design specs? Or what other design input documents do they apply to? Last point, I think, if you don't have the resources, seek out high quality help if you need it, but vet your resources well. Pay for it now or in the long run, which is a lot more costly. And it
Yeah.
may run your company down into the ground, which I'd rather not see. I'd rather help the client get them to the point that they are successful. That's my goal. That's always been my goal.
Yeah.
But also to get a safe product to the patient.
Yeah. It's that, it's a little bit of attention. You don't want one without, you can't have one without the other, really. So very cool.
But
I
it's also
appreciate,
a balance.
yeah, it is a balance. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting dichotomies in life or balances, tensions. Um, and maybe another episode at some point.
That
uh,
sounds like project management, which is not my thing.
I'll find someone who's willing to argue with me on it.
Oh, I'm sure about that.
Uh, Leo, this is really good. I think this is going to be a very valuable episode. We'll put the links to the show notes. So if you want to find Leo or if you want to find what he's doing, where could people find you the easiest?
The easiest is LinkedIn, which
Okay.
I'll make sure you have that. And my website, eisnersafety.com. I have a blog, which also ends up on LinkedIn all the time, as you know.
Yeah.
I think those are the easiest. And if you need to talk to me, you can schedule a meeting on my website.
Okay. Very cool. Thank you so much, Leo. Really appreciate all the work you're doing in the industry and your willingness to share your expertise and your knowledge here today. And congratulations on the IEC 1906 award as well. So,
Thank you. It's been a pleasure today.
all right, we'll let you get back to it. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast. We will see you all next time. Take care.